Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. In this episode we'll be looking at the dynamics of the Watts marriage. It's an area that I think is very underestimated. It's not very often discussed. I think one of the reasons is it's a very tricky area to go into because you've sort of got to be quite authentic. You've got to talk about what kind of husband was Chris Watts, what kind of father was Chris Watts, what kind of wife was Shan'ann, what kind of mother was Shan'ann. And it's kind of difficult to have a honest conversation about that without talking about both people. So, you can't fairly, you can't completely, you can't sort of cover the whole discussion if you're only going to talk about one person, whether it's Chris Watts or Shan'ann Watts. So in this episode we're going to go into a little bit of detail about some of the dynamics in the marriage and something that looks like what may have been Shanann's strategy to deal with the spiraling debt situation they were in. And I think if she'd implemented it, I think it could have worked. I think it could have certainly made things better and certainly made things easier. The question is, would it have worked for Chris Watts? Maybe it would have worked for it would have worked in terms of kind of sorting out the immediate financial peril, but was it something he would want, right? Something I've always been very curious about and very sort of in kind of disbelief about is when you go through the discovery, when you go through all the texts between Shan'ann and Watts and vice versa. Clearly we don't have all of them, but there's just no mention of financial concerns from either of them to one another or sort of to other people. You just don't really have that communicated in text. We know that Watts had mentioned it to Kissinger. We know that he was concerned that Watts told Nickole that he and Shan'ann were housebroke all the time. And one can imagine anyone in that situation would be anxious and worried. And when Nickole asked if his lifestyle was sustainable, he said no. Now one wonders if someone had asked Shan'ann about that. Are you guys housebroke all the time? What she would have said. If someone had asked her, is your lifestyle sustainable, what would Shan'ann have said? How would she perhaps have responded? And just to clarify, when we ask these questions, we're not trying to accuse someone, we're not trying to point a finger at someone, we're not trying to be on this person's side or not on that person's side. We're trying to just understand the situation from an impartial perspective. That's really what we are always trying to do in all the cases that we cover. This particular episode is based on a blog written on February the 15th, 2019. So it was compiled shortly before Chris Watts made his second confession. It was literally 3 days after this blog was written. But before we get to that, please subscribe to this channel. A lot of people have actually subscribed in the last couple of days. Welcome to you guys. I hope you will enjoy the content here. If you are, please leave a comment, like, share, and let's get started. Now, someone recently left a comment, just from the avatar. It looks like it's someone who's perhaps in college, just talking about the fact that, wow, your coverage is so boring, your voice is so boring, it's all monotonous. Sorry about that, but when it comes to true crime, it's sort of difficult to come at it without gravitas. It's difficult to be sort of, have some kind of musical jingle to one's tone of voice. I've sat in on a number of murder trials, and it's quite a job to sit through hours and hours of monotone, of prosecutors droning on, defense attorneys droning on. When the accused are on the stand, they tend to drone on. The whole idea of a criminal trial is that it's an unemotional, sober assuaging of the facts of a case. It's also not something you do in sort of, 5 minutes. When a case goes to trial, it's not sort of, snap your fingers and let's get to the point. Like, tell me now immediately what you're talking about. Can you just get to the point? Murder trials take a long time. The Patrick Frazee case has just gone to trial, and it's wrapped up in a super quick time. But even the prosecutors there kind of said that they were amazed at how quickly this case went to trial. How quickly did it go to trial? Well, it took a year, and thousands of pages and deals, and the case actually still isn't over yet because there are still going to be follow-up trials and so on. So this whole idea that you're going to sort of thin slice an entire case, it's people's lives that were lost, and who are the people involved. No, I don't care about that. I want to just snap my fingers and just tell me yes or no, whatever. That's not how true crime works. There are a lot of layers, there's a lot of detail, and there's a lot of depth, and you either are someone who has a mind for that, you're either someone who is interested in the details, is interested in the analysis, is interested in the sort of rabbit hole, or you're not. Or you're someone who just has absolutely no interest in it, and you just want to know, are they guilty or aren't they? Is he a psychopath or isn't he? Was this person involved, yes or no? If that's what you're looking for, you're not going to enjoy this channel. So here we do delve into the detail, and what is amazing is how much information you can find when you look for it. Most people aren't. Most people seem to want to live in the sort of veneer, just have a shallow experience of life, and that's fine. If you want that, you can have a happy life. But life can also be deeper and darker, and it can also be deeper in a meaningful way. It can also be deeper in a way that you appreciate things, you appreciate your life, you appreciate the people that love you, you appreciate what you have in your life, or whatever it is. And with Thanksgiving coming up, it's important to take stock and to see where we've come and what we know and what we've learned and where we're going. So that's kind of what True Crime Rocket Science aims to do, is be authentic. And to be authentic, one can't do in sort of an instant. Authenticity requires effort and requires concentration. I think the reason for that is because we live in such a fake society. We're programmed to not be authentic. We're programmed to be zombies on social media. We're programmed to be reactionary. We're programmed to be part of a tribe. We're not programmed to think about things and to consider and to kind of reflect. And True Crime Rocket Science then is contrary to that, where I am trying to program you to reflect. Obviously introspection one can do infinitely, and that's not what we want to do here. We want to introspect, we want to investigate and interrogate, and then we want to stop. And we're fast approaching that point with the Chris Watts case, where it is time that we start to let go of this case and move on to others like the Patrick Frazee case and so on. And the book that I'm writing on Frazee Murder Most Foul, what's so amazing with that case, and again, it's when you let go of the one thing and go to another thing, the meaning comes through. You see how Frazee's different to Chris Watts. You see how Kelsey Bereth is different to Shan'ann. You see how the whole dynamic is totally different. And yet within these differences there are so many similarities. And this is how, looking at things in different ways and through different scenarios, we get to know reality better, and we also get to know ourselves better, and that's really the point at the end of the day. Okay, so let's get going with Shanann's plan to deal with the debt situation. The blog is titled that Chris Watts wasn't going to like it, not one bit. And what that's already showing is Shan'ann doing something that would have been perfect for her, perfect for her situation, may have been perfectly not right for Chris Watts, because he was involved in something that he shouldn't have been, because he was involved in something that was a secret and inappropriate. But that's not really the issue here. The issue is what could have caused schisms in their marriage, what could have caused sort of tears in the fabric, and we want to answer that question. We want to answer it within the fabric of the case, not imposing our own thoughts on it and our own bias. Okay, so let's get to that. If Shan'ann was in financial difficulty previously, and she was, the solution seemed to be fairly simple. Move someone in and scrimp. She did this in 2015 when they went bankrupt. She moved in her parents for 15 to 16 months. Presumably this saved money in childcare fees, and by pooling resources, food and meals could be cheaper when the expenses were shared by 4 rather than 1 or 2. Now, there's more background to this situation than I've actually provided right here in this particular post, and that is that when the Ruseks moved in with Shan'ann and her husband, they actually put their house up for sale, and there's some indication that the Ruseks may have had some financial difficulties of their own. Not going to go into that in any detail here, but you almost have a situation, it looks like you have a situation where there may have been financial difficulty, and so it's not just the Watts couple that sort of need helping out, it is perhaps other people as well, and so them living together was a way of potentially rescuing themselves out of that situation. Not just the Watts family, but perhaps their in-laws. And in that situation, you can sort of imagine if the Ruseks had sold their house, what would have happened next? Would they have moved to Colorado? Would they have? How long would they have stayed in the house longer than they were staying there? Where would they have stayed in Colorado, and what impact would have had on how things turned out? Because I think in a way what Watts did, the fact that he was able to have an affair, part of what kind of facilitated that was the fact that he didn't have his family around him. He'd moved somewhere else, so he didn't really have people who knew him, so the odds of bumping into somebody when he was with Kissinger was limited. It's not as though they were going out a lot together, but they did go to movies together in a public place, they did go to restaurants in a public place, and one wonders, if the Ruseks, say, were living in Colorado, would Watts have taken that chance? Would he have taken that risk? But coming back to this original situation of them living with Chris and Shan'ann for an extended period, how would you like to live with your in-laws for over a year? So whether you're a husband or a wife, if you just think about your life, your situation, your marriage, how would you feel about living with your in-laws for, say, a year and a half or so? And so the fact that the Ruseks did stay with the Watts provided investigators with some insight into the marriage. In other words, the Ruseks were living with them, and so they could say, what was it like when you were there? You know, what was their marriage like? What was sort of going on? And one of the things mentioned was that the girls would get punished for anything, and they would always cry for him. According to Rusek, he said Shan'ann set it up that when he left there, after watching them for the week that Shan'ann and Chris were gone, they would fly to North Carolina to be with them. Just to come back to this thing about the girls would get punished for anything, they would cry for him. I think this is a reference to Shanann's father. I don't think it's a reference to Chris Watts. I think it's the grandparents are often the good guys in any sort of marriage situation. They don't punish the children. They sort of, they tend to be almost the Santa Clauses of a family. They bring gifts, they bring love, they bring support, they bring kindness, and it's kind of more up to the parents to bring in the discipline side and to bring in don't do this, don't do that, and as a result, I think in most families, in many families, the grandparents are sort of the heroes, and grandchildren love them and are thrilled when they see them as a result. When Shan'ann had neck surgery, we have another sort of precedent for this idea of bringing someone in to help in some way. And so when Shan'ann had her neck surgery, which also involved a very substantial medical bill, you can kind of imagine that Christina Meacham being around for 2 months may have had something to do with babysitting. It may have had something to do with we're not quite sure why she was there exactly for that length of time, but it does factor in that maybe there was some kind of cost saving aspect. When we go to Jeremy Lindstrom's sort of explanation for why that happened, he said, well, Christina needed to sort of be around because Shan'ann couldn't lift the girls, and so you almost get this idea that Christina was there to help with the children. And why did she need help with the children? Well, possibly because they were not attending school during that time, so they were taken out of school, perhaps as a cost-saving measure. Shan'ann going to North Carolina for 6 weeks, and the whole idea there was also that both sets of grandparents would look after the children while she was working. It seems as if that was potential cost-saving issue as well. But then the idea was when she returned, she was going to put them back into school. And I don't think Chris Watts wanted that. I don't think he wanted them in school, which is why he called the school on the morning of the murders to get them unenrolled, if that's a word, to get them out of the school so that there wouldn't be any kind of bill involved. We know in 2018 they were scraping the bottom of the barrel again, but there was an easy solution in the offing. Do what she'd always done, move someone in and piggyback until things improve. Now, I don't think there's any dispute over the fact that things were really bad in 2018. We know all their credit cards were maxed out. We know that Shan'ann was upset with Watts for not taking an Uber to the airport and for getting really expensive parking and all that kind of thing. I've spoken about this before. People may sort of push back and say, well, obviously she was justified in doing that. Obviously he shouldn't have spent $60 on a meal, and he shouldn't have paid for expensive parking. Yeah, true, but the other side of it is, if you look at the Thrive things where they are going on holidays to faraway destinations, and she's driving an expensive car and they're living in an expensive house, those two things don't gel in a kind of obvious way. I'm not saying that rich people don't try and scrimp, because they do. I'm just saying their finances weren't great, and the immediate sort of noticing of a transaction at a meal, when you somewhere else, in another state, and you immediately notice that this particular bill has been transacted. Also, when he paid for the parking and he had to send screen grabs of it, and there's an immediate reaction. Shan'ann also wanted Watts to keep the receipt of his meal at the restaurant. That kind of immediate reaction is saying that it's certainly an important issue for her, that she's immediately going to Google the menu and all that kind of thing. Obviously she had the affair on her mind as well, but the point is just that there was definitely financial strain involved, and Shan'ann was aware of this when the idea came of when he said he didn't want another child, and there was this possibility that they were going to split up. Shan'ann kind of realized, I can't afford to bring up 3 children alone in Colorado. So I think you can sort of play devil's advocate and say, if they weren't struggling financially, were they prospering? Were they thriving? Were they sort of doing really great financially, that they could afford to buy big things? Like could they afford to buy a second car? Could they afford to buy, make sort of other kind of acquisitions? And the answer is no. They were behind on their mortgage. So I just want to be explicit about that sort of aspect. And so a potential solution to mitigate the financial hemorrhaging, not necessarily to bring in more money, but to curtail the expenses, was to move someone in. And that someone turned out to be Josh and Cassie Rosenberg, just another family of thrivers, a mom and pop team and their kids who could pool their resources. This plan wasn't just theoretical. We know this because on Saturday night, August 11th, when Watts was whining, dining, and doing other things with Nickole Kessinger, Josh Rosenberg sent Watts a text to ask if everything was okay and could they still come and stay at the house. Meaning, was it still okay if they moved in? And Josh was sort of aware that Shan'ann was pregnant. He wasn't supposed to be aware, but he was aware. But he was also aware that there was kind of strife on the home front. There was kind of unhappiness. And so he was sort of, it was quite a big deal. The Rosenbergs wanted to move to Colorado. I think Cassie got a job in Boulder or something. And so it was important that they have somewhere to stay when they were moving, and the move was in play. It was going to happen. Josh had good reason to be uncertain if the plan was still in the offing, because he knew Watts and his wife were arguing, and if they were arguing, where did it leave them? Right? If they were going to get divorced, then they couldn't stay there. So it was important that they know they're not getting divorced. And so Shan'ann may have been saying, no, we're not getting divorced, but what about Watts? How did he feel? So when Rosenberg sent that text, Watts didn't respond to Josh until the next morning, which was Sunday, August the 12th. And when he did, he said it was cool, even though it wasn't cool at all. Watts said they could move in, but he wanted to know when, which I think is quite significant. I don't think he did think it was cool, and I don't think he did want them to move in, but obviously if he said that, they would tell Shan'ann, and then Shan'ann would know there was very serious problems going on. Not only that, it would also be a case that Cassie would possibly take Shanann's side, and possibly Josh as well, and they would then become like an unofficial opposition to Chris Watts. So Watts lied to Josh about something else. He pretended he knew what it was like at the Rockies game, and there's a text showing that. So the fact that he was lying about going to the Rockies game, Josh didn't know about the affair. Well, he was probably also lying about the fact that it was okay for him to move in. It's important to see the text between Shan'ann and her pals Nickole and Cassie in context to get a real sense for how the idea of moving in with Shan'ann to provide support, perhaps help pay the bills and take care of the kids came about. It's clear and to some extent understandable that Shan'ann, Nickole and Cassie quickly formed a formidable alliance of three, and they meant business. If him was the general theme of it, and you can go to the blog and go through the actual screen grabs of the correspondence and read it for yourselves. Don't take my word for it. Go and look yourselves and look at what they are saying to one another. But as I say, if him was the general theme of it, if him and take the house, even though the house was in Watts' name, they figured they could sort of bully their way into it and take charge, and at the very least take the kids and get half of what the house is worth. If him. Perhaps under normal circumstances, Watts would have crumbled and turned the house over to his wife and whoever she wanted to stay over, rent, cohabit or whatever. But these weren't normal circumstances. This situation this time around definitely wasn't going to work for him and his mistress. That's the critical point. The critical point is whether Watts would in the past have fallen for this. This wasn't the past, this was a new situation, and obviously if the Rosenbergs were staying with him, they would find out very quickly, because when Shan'ann wasn't around, they would be around, and it would be more difficult to fool an extra couple living in the house. He wouldn't obviously ever be able to bring Kessinger to the house again, and also if he wasn't home, he'd have to kind of explain where he was. If he was on the phone, he'd have to kind of explain to them where he was, and Cassie would probably sort of figure it out. So the situation wasn't going to be very good if he wanted to keep up the affair. So from here, when I just refer you to the red arrows and circles in some of the final text at the blog post, I've provided a link to the description, so you can head on out over there and just scroll down. It's right at the end, and then just look at the correspondence yourselves. But it's a conversation about moving to Casa Watts, which is another way of saying sort of the castle of the Watts castle, whatever. And then also a discussion on how Weld County deals with alimony and splitting the house, even if it is in the husband's name. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.